Growing up in the Five Points tenement district, Daniel Driscoll had built up a significant criminal record by the time he reached adulthood. By then, he had been arrested 25 times for offenses that often involved stabbings and shootings, and he had served a total of 16 years in both the New York State Penitentiary and New York State Prison. In addition to his crimes, Driscoll also acted as a Fagin, training local youth in the art of pickpocketing. In 1882, he was arrested for grand larceny but managed to escape from the tombs. While being transported in a Black Maria, he switched identities with a man who had been arrested for public drunkenness. Upon arrival, Driscoll simply paid a $10 fine and walked out of the prison. By the early 1880s, he had risen to prominence within the Wyos, the most powerful street gang in the city at the time. Following the execution of longtime leader Mike McGloin in 1883, he, along with Danny Lyons, took over leadership of the gang. In 1885, he was forced to flee the city and spent some time on the West Coast before returning to New York in May of 1886. On June 26, 1886, Driscoll took a coach to a 3-story brick house on the north side of Hester Street. According to traditional accounts, Bridget Garrity had approached Driscoll, claiming that she had been cheated by the owners of a panel house operating within the Wyos territory. Despite being barred from the property by the resident bouncer, John McCarthy, with whom Driscoll had a long-standing feud, he arrived at the house with Garrity around 4 a.m. Driscoll sent Garrity ahead so she could be let in by McCarthy, and then allowed Driscoll to enter afterwards. However, after Garrity entered the front parlor, McCarthy spotted Driscoll and attempted to close the door. Driscoll blocked it with his arm, and during the struggle, McCarthy drew his revolver. What happened next is unclear. According to news accounts, Garrity tried to stop McCarthy from using his weapon. Alerted by her cries, Driscoll pulled his own revolver and attempted to shoot McCarthy, aiming between the edge of the door and the door jamb. His first shot missed and hit a wall opposite McCarthy. He then tried to fire between the inner door and the door jamb but was unsuccessful. At this point, both McCarthy and Garrity fled the area, with Garrity running to a back room. As Driscoll entered the darkened hallway, Garrity ran out from the back room door. Mistaking her for McCarthy, Driscoll fired into the dark and hit Garrity in the abdomen. Driscoll attempted to flee the scene but was pursued by police officers who had just arrived at the house. Several warning shots were fired, but Driscoll did not stop. He disappeared into the open door of a Baxter Street tenement where his mother lived. After an extensive search, police found him hiding behind the door of an unoccupied apartment in the neighboring building. Although he denied shooting Garrity and had no weapon on him, he was taken into custody and held at the Mulberry Street police station. Garrity was taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she died later that afternoon. Before her death, she identified McCarthy as her attacker. McCarthy was initially arrested, but he denied firing a shot and presented his revolver, which was still loaded and unfired. This claim was later dismissed, as authorities believed Garrity was attempting to protect her supposed lover. At Driscoll's arraignment, 50 members of the Wyos were present in the courtroom, but were ordered to leave by Justice Patterson. On the morning of June 28th, Driscoll and McCarthy were brought to the Tombs Police Court. They appeared friendly and conversed for some time before the proceedings began. However, once court was in session, both men blamed each other for Garrity's death. When McCarthy testified, he claimed that he had been sitting in his room when Garrity, a woman he said he had never seen before, entered his home with Driscoll close behind her. McCarthy said he shut the door behind her, but Driscoll fired his pistol through an opening near the upper hinge. Fearing that Driscoll might enter another way and shoot him from behind, McCarthy jumped out the window in an adjoining room into the yard. He heard a second shot but didn't return to the house until he saw Driscoll being arrested by police. When McCarthy re-entered his room, he found Garrity lying on his bed, accusing him of shooting her. McCarthy then handed his pistol to Officer Peter Monahan, who confirmed that the gun was fully loaded and had not been fired. Monahan corroborated this story during the trial. Driscoll interrupted the court proceedings, asserting that he was unarmed at the time of the incident and that McCarthy was the only one who could have shot Garrity. Driscoll then addressed the court. "I've got a bad name with the police, and they say, give a dog a bad name and we'll hang him. McCarthy's got lots of money, and I am without a cent. He's trying to put the blame on me. I'll show you up in the true light when the time comes, my good friend." Carrie Wilson, a resident of Chrysty Street, testified that she was in the building at the time of the shooting and saw Driscoll and Garrity arrive in a coach with another man and woman. She claimed to have seen Driscoll fire 2 shots through the door, and after the second shot, a woman fell. John Green and Emmanuel DeVos, both local residents, testified that they were in the back room when they also heard the shots fired. On the final day of the trial, a doctor from St. Vincent's Hospital made a surprise appearance, testifying that Garrity had told him McCarthy was the one who shot her. Although Driscoll's lawyer, Bill Howe, managed to undermine the credibility of some witnesses, Driscoll was found guilty of first-degree murder on September 30th, 1886. Days before his conviction, Driscoll was moved to Murderer's Row after the warden discovered his attempt to tunnel out of his cell. For the remainder of his time in the Tombs, he was guarded by Inspector Williams and 75 police officers. The day before his execution, Driscoll was allowed to see his relatives. In his final words to his wife, he said, "I die happy. Take good care of yourself, Mary. I'll pray for you in heaven." Despite maintaining his innocence, he continued to accuse Warden Walsh of wrongdoing, though these claims were disputed by several prison guards who signed a petition defending the warden. On the morning of January 23, 1888, Driscoll was brought to the yard of the Tombs prison, where he was publicly hanged. In 1887, Henry Newton Brown arrived in the New Mexico Territory and soon became involved in the Lincoln County War. Aligning himself with Billy the Kid and other cowboys, Brown joined the Regulators, who worked at John Tunstall's Rio Feliz ranch. On April 1, 1878, Brown, Billy the Kid, Jim French, Frank McNabb, John Middleton, and Fred Waite ambushed and killed Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady, who was indirectly responsible for Tunstall's death. Just 3 days later, at a gunfight at Blazer's Mill, Brown and the Regulators fought against Buckshot Roberts, whom they believed was involved in Tunstall's murder. Roberts was seriously wounded by Charlie Beaudry, a wound that would eventually prove fatal, though not before he killed the Regulators' leader, Richard M. Brewer. Roberts then retreated into Blazer's office, continuing the fight with Brown and the Regulators until he died the following day. Now fugitives for Brady's killing, the Lincoln County Regulators spent several months in hiding. On July 15, 1878, they found themselves cornered in Alexander McSween's home in Lincoln by members of the House and Brady's men. Henry Brown was one of the 3 Regulators not inside McSween's house, but instead firing from a grain warehouse behind the Tunstall store. He, along with Billy the Kid and others, escaped when the house was set ablaze. McSween was killed while trying to flee the fire, marking the effective end of the Lincoln County Cattle War. In the fall of that year, Brown, Billy the Kid, and a few Regulators sold rustled horses in Tecose, Texas. Due to murder warrants in New Mexico, Brown stayed in Texas, where he eventually became a lawman, though his exact role remains unclear. Known for his quick temper, he was dismissed from his lawman position in Texas. Brown then moved through the Indian Territory and Kansas, settling in Cadwell, Kansas, a violent cattle town. In July of 1882, he became assistant marshal, and soon after, marshal. Partnering with former outlaw Ben Wheeler, they effectively cleaned up the town. Described as a modest and introverted man who avoided vices and attended church, Brown had a firm demeanor and a quick temper when provoked. He was noted for his gun skills and received a gold and silver mounted Winchester rifle from the grateful community. Brown used the rifle in the line of duty, killing gambler Newton Boyce and renegade Indian Spotted Horse. Brown improved his social standing by marrying Alice Maud Levagood, a college-educated woman. He and his assistant were celebrated as Cadwell's most effective lawmen by the time of their 3rd term. In April of 1884, Brown and Wheeler fabricated a story to persuade the mayor to grant them permission to travel into the Indian Territory under the guise of hunting a murderer. Accompanied by Cherokee Outlet cowboys William Smith and John Wesley, they headed to Medicine Lodge, Kansas, where they attempted to rob the Medicine Valley Bank. Their plan quickly unraveled when gunfire broke out, resulting in the shooting of 2 bank officers. Wheeler, and possibly Wesley, shot George Geppert, the bank's chief cashier, who managed to seal the vault before he died, preventing the robbers from escaping with any money. Under heavy fire from a posse of 12 cowboys who had been in a stable across the street, the outlaws fled. They unknowingly rode into a box canyon several miles south of town and were eventually forced to surrender. While imprisoned in the town's small jail, anticipating a lynch mob, Brown wrote a heartfelt letter to his wife. In it, he expressed his deep affection and regret, asking her to visit him, manage his belongings, and keep his Winchester rifle. He lamented the failed robbery and the unexpected trouble, explaining that their arrest was due to a horse giving out. Brown asked her to sell what she could, send him clothes, and have her picture taken. He reassured her of his love and urged her to handle their affairs as best she could. Despite his involvement in the robbery and the actions of his accomplices, he pleaded for her loyalty and support. The letter concluded with his loving farewell. "Now, my darling wife, goodbye. H.N. Brown." Realizing a lynching was imminent, Wesley removed his boot and used it to get rid of the leg iron that shackled him to Brown. Brown then tied the loose end of the leg iron to his leg with a bandana, allowing him to run freely. Smith, who was handcuffed to Wheeler, managed to slip the handcuff off his small hand, freeing all 4 men without the mob's knowledge. When the lynch mob arrived at 9 p.m. and opened the jail door, Brown charged through the startled crowd and into an alley beside the jail. He was met with a blast from a shotgun at almost point-blank range, resulting in fatal injuries. He died being nearly torn in half. Wheeler managed to run about 100 yards before being critically wounded by gunfire. Despite his injuries, he, along with Smith and Wesley, was later hanged from an elm tree by the mob.